Hey everybody, this is Kodak here, doing just another one of those videos that's just full of little subjects that are really not substantial enough to make their own video, just to sort of get something on the channel. And yeah, I know I haven't posted much on the channel as much as I used to, and part of that's because YouTube, the money I get from YouTube has just completely imploded, so I had to go out and find a job. I mean, it's not all bad, though. It's sort of an on-demand thing, so I just kind of clock in and wait for something for me to be needed. So, because I've been away from my computer for so long, it means I've been able to get back into reading books again. That's nice. I don't, like, doom scroll on my phone like so many of my colleagues do. It's nice to just kind of sit back and have a book. But, anyway, let's just talk about a bunch of things. And card games. Remember card games? I can't remember the last time I talked about card games on this channel. And let's start with one that I actually was really excited for back at the time when it was still being beta tested, and that was the card game known as Altered. This was a game out of France, and it was a Kickstarter darling. It literally made millions off of its Kickstarter, and now the game is over. So, Altered was a game whose gameplay style I actually really liked. It's a game that, rather than having you, like, deal life points or do battles, it is instead a game where you have expeditions. You basically have pawns that start on either end of a map and try to meet in the middle, and you have the two separate lanes that you're competing for in order to get there. And because each turn is an entire expedition, not just one round of combat, that means that all of the cards that you play on your turn, they go home, they go away, except for a select few, because something that I actually gave the game recognition for was its reserve mechanic, where cards that you play during your turn, rather than going to the discard pile, they first go to the reserve pile, giving you a second chance to play them. And at the end of the turn, you're allowed to save a couple of them for the next turn. So the fact that it sort of automatically increased card value, the way it allowed you to essentially hit twice, do some plan in advance for the next turn, I thought that was really good. I thought Altered was fine, but boy howdy did this game suffer from a lot of problems. It suffered in kind of the same way that the Lightseekers card game did, in that the game itself was actually pretty good with a pretty unique approach to game design, which are things that I always love, but it was saddled with some kind of nasty burden that tends to drag it kicking and screaming into the abyss. In the case of Lightseekers, it was this sort of meh online toys to life thing that they had going on that turned out to just, not be very good, especially compared to the card game, but because the card game was not really enough to keep everything else functional, the whole thing kind of gave out. In the case of Altered, it was it had this sort of pseudo NFT thing where you had to scan the code on the cards in order to take proper ownership of them in order to use them in official events. In theory, this meant that you could print additional copies of the card, print them with foil treatments and stuff like that. Not only, this thing had a ton of knock-on effects. The first of which being that by the time the game launched, this whole feature system that was like one of its big selling points was not ready. It did not get ready for a long time, long after interest for it had lapsed, and even then there were a lot of problems with it. Another knock-on effect of using these codes is that it makes trying to sell these cards on the secondary market an absolute nightmare. Having, like, registration codes on cards sounds like a fun idea. Oh, I can register the card online and play with it in my game. The problem is, in an era of live unboxings and pack openings, having it so that the cards can be easily swiped by anybody watching the stream means that it's an unsustainable system. Like I said, it also makes the secondary market a nightmare because you kind of have to prove that the code is fresh, etc., etc. I think another one of the big problems that Altered had, well, one thing, it suffered from the 2-year curse. The 2-year curse strikes again. The 2-year curse, it's a term that I coined a long time ago when talking about how there's this phenomenon where a game dies after 2 years. So you kind of have like several levels of card game. You have the game that's dead on arrival. That is, it releases to crickets. There's like no interest or the interest dies like immediately. These games only last like more than 2 sets by sheer force of will of the company making it. Like looking at games like Union Arena, like I don't think anybody actually plays that game at all. I think it's literally just Bandai trying to muscle in on the Weiss Schwarz thing. And I know a lot of stores near me, basically they were threatened to have their Gundam and One Piece cards cut off if they didn't also buy Union Arena. It was an absolutely bonkers nightmare. But there are too many games that were dead on arrival to really count. You also have the games that survive a long time, those that like go on for years and years and years, have lots of people still playing them. The 2-year curse is an interesting phenomenon because it tends to come about with a game that does capture a lot of initial interest, but then fails to keep that audience, usually by a combination of a failure to innovate and a demand that people buy new cards in set rotation without providing a decent cushion of reprints and things that can be used again. Like a lot of cards with fairly generic effects. Like, I don't know if the Fang Fighter card from Star Wars Unlimited got reprinted, but honestly, that's a game that I think is also kind of on its last legs at this point. I don't really know a lot of places that carry that. I know Lorcana is just kind of wandering through the muck at this point. None of the stores near me carry it. My local game store is struggling to sell it at 50% off. But Altered also kind of failed to innovate with its mechanics. I actually think it did fairly well at first with the mechanics it introduced. It introduced things like freeze and exhaustion, which could slow cards down. They introduced item cards, which have an effect, but like are sort of between permanent landmarks and the temporary cards, that they only stay around until you win. I thought those were fairly neat. The last set that they came out with struck me as a bit of a dud. They introduced a mechanic called Ascended, which the only thing this mechanic did was break ties, and exactly one of the 6 regions really interacted with Ascended in any meaningful way. It was quite the whimper to go out on. But the thing is, Altered had some other really cool things going for it, but something that I think also hampered it was Altered suffered from a severe lack of collectability. So most of the cards in the game come in 2 forms. They come in the common form and the rare form. And the rare form tends to have some different stats, or it's more economical, it gets some more abilities, or it enables you to splash in cards from other regions. And personally, I think this is a really cool idea. You could only make so many of the cards in your deck be rare cards. So essentially, it's an additional step of like deck building and sideboard construction where you're having to decide, okay, which cards in my deck do I want to upgrade to the rare form? That is a phenomenal idea for deck building. I honestly think it would work better in like a digital game, where deciding which cards to upgrade to their rare form would be like a toggle here and there. But the problem is, it did not really manifest in the form of something collectible. A lot of games, I've said in the past, I don't mind when games do like randomized products, because there is absolutely a right way and a wrong way to do it. Like with a lot of things. If you don't believe me, have a look at like light bulbs and planned obsolescence. There are definitely wrong ways to make almost everything. Like I've said, I don't think is a problem. As long as the rarity of cards that people are expected to collect are decently in moderation. Like if you limit those super rare cards, those ultra rare cards, to being like a deck's capstones, the essential cog of a machine that's surrounded by like regular rares and uncommon and common cards, then that's not really a problem. The problem is with Altered is that it has exactly 3 rarities. It has common, it has uncommon, which is what they call the rare cards in this game, and it has ultra rare, and nothing in between. There's no like regular rare cards, there's no like super rare cards. You have the commons, you have the rares, which are basically included in the packs at uncommon level. So like uncommon quantity, so I'm going to be calling them uncommons. And then you have the uniques. Each card sort of gets its own like twist on the artwork. Like the rarer the version of the card, the more extravagant the artwork. The idea is that uniques were algorithmically generated to have random abilities. So the problem with uniques, I mean, that seems like a cool idea. It's like, oh wow, I got this cool, unique card that nobody else has. The problem is it's kind of impossible to design deck building around it, and it also sort of makes them impossible to collect. There isn't really such a thing as a big hit in Altered packs, which the fact that Altered essentially had zero collectability, I mean, the fact that if you got one copy of a card, you could go and, you could just rattle off as many copies of that card as you wanted, in theory. And the fact that the uniques were essentially impossible to deck build around, I think sort of destroyed Altered's ability as a collectible game. So the things that happened with Altered, it struggled to innovate. It literally took them an entire year to introduce even one new hero for each faction, which was in this final set that they put out, and they didn't really strike me as terribly interesting. The way that the cards lacked collectability, the way that the codes on those cards not only forced them to maintain like a really terrible system to try to keep the game going and made the secondary market a nightmare, were all things that were dragging down an otherwise fairly good game. Although it seems that there was also a lot of pretty severe behind-the-scenes blundering as well, because they tried to do a Kickstarter for another game, but apparently the $2 million that they pulled in was not enough to keep the studio afloat. So something was going on with Altered, with how they were spending their money. $2 million is in the grand scheme of like large, big business, $2 million is not that much money. Like, an easy way to think about it is $1 million is 20 employees, 20 to 30 employees. Like, if each person received $50,000 as a salary, that's 20 people. It takes a lot of money to have a decently sized crew at a decent wage. But the thing about Altered is that it's a card game that could probably be run on a relatively small team. Needing $2 million in order to keep your game going is a lot. So I honestly think like Altered had this big success and it kind of went to their head. This happens a lot. It happened with MetaZoo 2. Well, MetaZoo 1, the original MetaZoo, not the second MetaZoo. I can't believe there's a second MetaZoo, and apparently it's not doing too well either. But it seems like that if $2 million was not enough for them to print one set for a relatively independent card game, then there's some kind of mismanagement going on. Either they tried to get too big too fast, or all sorts of various things there. Not to mention the name Altered has some pretty nasty search engine optimization. So there's a big tendency, especially these days with this whole like minimalist things, for people to like give their game like some kind of single word profound title, like Altered, or like I did a whole joke about this with my Ophidian 2350 video. The problem with that is if you type Altered into Google, you're going to get everything except for that card game. Everything with that name in it. It's why you see so many games that make nonsense words, like Lorcana, like, yes, even Redakai, like Cardfight Vanguard, where the word assembly is weird, or the word is something completely made up, because if you type that into a search engine, that's the only thing that's gonna come up. So, a name that is either like sort of a unique combination of letters or an odd mashing of words is actually a really good way to help your game get found because of that little search optimization engine trick. Although, speaking of names that have a single word in the English language, Chaotic is coming back. And I haven't really spoken about this much because Chaotic has been threatening to come back for years. So I remember Chaotic from the good old days. I still have like my scanner tin from back in the day. I've got my Chaor card. I have my first edition Lord Von Blut, which is like above curve in power and all sorts of crazy stuff like that. It had a cartoon show, which I honestly think was like one of the better cartoon shows. They kind of turned it into an action show where rather than just playing the card game, they actually like had the tactical battles play out, which I think was actually pretty neat. Like, I actually liked the seasons that looked like the Aaron Esurance commercials more than the ones where they tried to look like anime. It felt like it had more energy to it. Wasn't trying to take itself like Uber's super de-duper serious, and I personally like that more. Apparently they actually have this time signed a deal with Panini to get the game to come out again. So we'll have to see about that. I've shot them an email. They haven't answered me yet. Maybe I should shoot them another one. I do, however, spy a pretty obvious problem with Chaotic, because the idea behind Chaotic is that the cards have randomly generated stats and have a code that you have to enter in to use them online. Oh dear, that's one of the things that killed Altered. That's one of the things that really doesn't fly in a world of pack openings and live unboxings. Oh goodness. Yeah, that's gonna be something interesting to overcome. Although, speaking of, in another kind of funny little twist, speaking of Panini, that reminds me of this. So, Bandai has announced a Naruto card game, and it looks like it's going to be yet another sort of Bandai slop thing with generic resource cards with, you know, attackers and blockers and all that jazz. The thing that really kills me about it, though, is that they launched it at the same time that a Naruto card game called Naruto Mythos, released out of a company in Italy called Chickaboom, is finally starting its international push. And the Chickaboom game is actually kind of good. It doesn't, like, use attackers and blockers and stuff like that. It's a lane-based game, which, yeah, there's a lot of lane-based games now, but at least lane-based games tend to do a better job of keeping that mechanic interesting. Something else that's funny is the Bandai Naruto card game seems to have stolen a bunch of mechanics from the Chickaboom game. And the reason I said that Panini reminded me of this is because I'm also reminded of the time that Panini brought back the old Score Dragon Ball Z card game, was doing really well, and then Bandai was in, nope, shut it all down, we're making our own Dragon Ball game so that we can take all the money. And they made the first of their Bandai slop titles, as I'm going to call them now. All of these games, you know, they have 6 colors, but they only start with 4, and they use, like, generic resource cards and blockers and yada yada yada. I'm getting pretty sick of those games. Like, I liked these games when they were not the only thing that anybody felt like they were allowed to make. I wonder if my life decking discussion, like, contributed to this. If it did, I'm sorry. I'm trying to escape from that. But yeah, so the Chickaboom game, your deck consists only of character cards. You start the game with 5 chakra, and you can play your ninjas face down to reveal them later, often for some kind of special ambush effect. The Bandai game, apparently, your deck is nothing but character cards. You start the game with 5 chakras, and you can play ninjas face down to reveal them later for some kind of special ambush effect. So, yeah, do feel free to be that annoying guy at the party that was like, actually, this Bandai Naruto card game stole a bunch of its rules from a game out of Italy. You know, by all means. By all means. Ugh. Hey, did you know World of Tanks got a TCG? Yeah, I learned that fairly recently myself. World of Tanks, I know they've had like a miniatures game for the longest time that takes advantage of, you know, mechanics like Fires of War and stuff like that. Like, that makes sense to me. A miniatures game based on World of Tanks makes sense. The one based on a card game, however, a lot of people just kind of didn't know it came out. You know, the World of Tanks card game, nobody kind of really knew it came out. The Jurassic Park card game, I kind of had to hear about from one of my supporters. I got a box of it for ridiculously cheap, and I'm not entirely sure what's meant to be exciting here. Then again, I'm not really, like, big on, like, military, like ground combat machines, so, you know, I get a T-35, and I'm like, oh, okay, that's neat. Although, another card game that's going on is the Pal World card game. A lot of people have been asking me to talk about it, to talk about Pal World. I know Pal World is like this big meme because they basically launched by, you know, copycatting Pokemon, but Pokemon just hasn't been able to get any lawsuits against them to stick. It's Pokemon with guns, and now they're teasing putting out kind of a trading card game. One of the primary reasons I'm not talking about it is, first of all, I don't know Pal World. I've never played Pal World. I haven't really been interested in Pal World. Also, that big ol' B is on it, Bushiroad. I am pretty infamous for how much I hate Bushiroad. It's also one of the reasons I haven't really touched games like Godzilla or Hololive. I briefly looked at Shadowverse Evolve, just like everybody else who briefly looked at it, then noticed the $30 price tag and was like, yeah, I think I'm good, actually. I mean, everybody knows my hatred started with Cardfight Vanguard, because I didn't like how the show felt really manipulative towards the people who were watching it. So, I swear, ever since Angelic Layer came out, Angelic Layer was a series made by Clamp, who ironically also worked on a season of Vanguard, if I recall correctly. But it's a show where a lot of the core elements is somebody sort of finding purpose and meaning through a hobby. And ever since that came out, all of these companies have been out there going, ooh, we want one of those. The problem is, one of the reasons Angelic Layer works as well as it does is because it's not tied to any kind of brand. Once you try to use those same sorts of story mechanics with like a brand that people own, like I know they've also tried to do it with like Beat-em-on, they tried to do it with Gundam Build Fighters. Oh my god, talk about an unbearable show. The problem is there's that sort of cloying corporate presence at play. You know, all these, you know, it's literally like an entire TV show that's like when a brand tries to adopt a meme. That's part of how it feels, but yeah, that corporate manipulation just never really goes away, and it just leaves a pit in my stomach, and that's one of the big reasons I don't like Bushiroad. I'm willing to tolerate games like Yu-Gi-Oh! And stuff like that. Like, the only show I've seen that even comes close to, like, accomplishing this was the first 2 seasons of WeCross, Selector Infected and Selector Spread WeCross, because the game was actually kind of a backseat to the character study that it was introducing. I loved the moment where they essentially called out Madoka's final solution from the Magica Madoka series as being kind of selfish. But the thing is, it's sort of the opposite of so many of these shows inspired by card games, in that it's a show where they don't like constantly try to teach you how to play with the cards that you should go and buy right now, or else you'll be defeated by losers and never go on any dates. Instead, it's you can follow the games being played if you already know how to play. Instead, the character is more the focus, and that's why I think it's a much better show. It's sort of the anti-Vanguard. Although another thing, a little update on my Gundam Assemble video. It turns out those first grade kits are actually pretty easy to find at the $5 level. The ones that I kind of did the Larry the Cable Guy joke with. So I've actually, by getting a first grade Gundam and a first grade Char Zaku 2, yeah, they make that too for like $5, along with swapping the Wing Zero Gundam for the SD, I have been able to reduce my total down to about $56. So even if I remove that cheeky coupon I used on the Gundam Vidar, then I can still be well below par. In fact, I'm at about $9 a model, so I'm sort of breathing down the Abawa Ku set. And they also have the regular Zaku in these entry grade kits. So if you get the Char Zaku and 2 regular Zaku entry grade models, you have the Zaku arrangement, that whole squad, the whole game legal squad in the full size for just $15. So yeah, the figures aren't great. They have like next to no posability. They're all single color plastic. The seams are placed rather carelessly, but I guess if you're like one of those folks who grew up on like the models that are single color plastic and are like that, then maybe that works. But I don't know what first graders they're giving these to. I wouldn't. Honestly, I don't know how well Gundam Assemble is going to do. What would I change about it? Believe it or not, I would incorporate blind boxes. Like I've said before, I do not think that randomized product is a bad thing. It is not like exploitative on its face. It's just that there are right and wrong ways to do it. But imagine if they took like the super expensive Gundam Seed set or the upcoming G Gundam set, if they took all the models in there and made them into blind boxes where you got like a random individual model inside. I think those things would do super well. You could also, randomize it out. That means you could draft. You could just buy 3 boxes and congratulations, that's your team. I hope you didn't get the Petit Mobile 3 times. I mean, it would be kind of rude for them to have the Petit Mobile be in there. But right now we're looking at $40 sets that include only 3 figures, and one of them is often a dreg, like the Petite Mobile or the Magella Tank Escape Capsule. That's just... And, oh yes, another thing they did is they finally said that you are allowed to, I guess, get like print-out cards or print-on-demand cards for the models that came in the trading card game set. So the thing about miniatures games these days is because of stuff like 3D printers, there needs to be like a solid way to authenticate that the figures being used on the table were acquired legitimately. And one of the easiest way to do that is like units and tactics cards. You see these all over miniatures games, like I have like the Shatterpoint Clone Squad 99 set, and they came with official cards. It is an incredibly cost-effective form of validation. Is it the perfect form of validation? No, I'm not going to claim that, but it is incredibly cheap to do, because replicating those cards in a way that's fairly convincing is pretty difficult to do. It's more difficult to do, believe it or not, than 3D printing the model. So the idea is that these cards is that you need them for play as a form of authentication. But then Bandai went and printed a ton of these model sets without those cards, without those authenticators. So they were they made themselves, they did a rookie mistake and put themselves in a really bad situation where they had to budge and say, okay, yeah, you can print out the cards for these models and use them. So that means we have now an entire series of models where authentication is kind of optional. It's going to be interesting to see what problems that causes. Although, speaking of the Gundam trading card game, I said that the game seemed kind of half-baked, and I turned out to be right. They had to change the entire rules because
You're mocking me, aren't you?
Oh, no.
yeah, apparently the cards that are 1 cost 2 twos, the game's Grizzly Bears, the game's like Stitch equivalents, they had to limit them because they were so overwhelming. It was literally decks made out of nothing, like pretty much nothing but starter deck and common cards were raffle stomping tournaments just everywhere. Just all of these common 2/2s and the cards from the Amuro Ray starter deck. So apparently me buying 2 copies of that deck was the right move, and apparently those spare Amuro Rays that I put into the boxes of junk, I'm all out of them now, were worth their weight in gold. But yeah, the Gundam card game turned out to have a pretty serious flaw to it. I did accuse the game of being half-baked, and, well, I feel pretty darn vindicated right now. Although, speaking of starter decks, so I always talk about, like, the price of starter decks and stuff like that. If your starter deck is more than, like, $10 or $15, it better have a darn good reason. So I, after I did my video on this game called Rematch by Brother Ming Games, which is sort of Puyo Puyo turned into, like, a competitive, like, turn-based board game, a lot of people told me about this game called Dice Throne, which works largely the same way. You also have, like, the character board, and they have some unique mechanics, and although it's very different from how the how Rematch is played, because Rematch is a game with a ton of built-in counterplay. Dice Throne is kind of like if you took the character boards and small gimmicks from that and combined them with the game Ashes, because you have some dice you roll, you have a deck of cards you play with. But their starter sets include everything you need to play. They include the board, the decks, you know, the playmat. They include the tokens. They include the tracking dials. All of that in a reusable storage tray for $17. So all of you big companies out there putting out starter decks, if your starter deck costs more than the starter decks for Dice Throne, there'd better be a darn good reason as to why. And quote unquote, the IP is really popular, does not fly, okay? Riot Games, I still haven't gotten over the fact that I had to go to an organized play event to get an important piece that's necessary for play, okay? That drives me nuts. So, yeah, that's just my rants for a while. If there's anything I missed, feel free to ding me in the comments if you like to. The game that's been on screen is a game called Sky Children of the Light. It is one of the few free-to-play games that I've actually, like, put serious money into, because it's a great sort of cozy game that doesn't use gacha mechanics with its microtransactions, like, at all. You're literally buying only skins, maybe some candles here and there, but you get what you pay for. There's nothing randomized about it. It's also by the people who made the legendary game Journey, and this is essentially its spiritual successor, where you can find new players and help guide them through the game. It's a fantastic title. I love it to bits. Hashtag not sponsored. So, yeah, I was sent some cards for the Naruto Chikaboom game. I'm working on a video on that right now where I talk about the rules. The rules, I think, are actually really cool. And, yeah, until next time, this is Kodak signing off.